Brand program. I'm Ollie Crouch, Head of Strategic Development at the CarbonNeutral Company, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Steve Prior and James Hepburne-Scott, the co-founders of the company Forest Carbon. For those of you that don't know, the CarbonNeutral Company has provided climate solutions to businesses for over 15 years. We're privileged to count companies including Coca-Cola, M&S, Microsoft, and hundreds of small and medium-sized enterprises amongst those who have used us to design and deliver GHG reduction programs. Our company has a special relationship with forestry and land use. When the company was formed in 1997, we were called Future Forests. And in the early days, nearly all of our projects were focused on woodland creation in the UK. We used carbon finance to complement the Woodland Grant Scheme to develop over 90 woodlands. In 2005, we suspended that activity due to concerns related to double counting. Fast forward almost a decade, and the UK government is getting its act together. It recognises there is a job to be done to incentivise woodland creation, and it's establishing the framework to encourage corporates into the market. I'll be engaging Steve and James in a discussion to explore this topic over the next 20 minutes. If you'd like to ask a question, you can do so throughout the presentation via the question tab on screen. Simply type in your question, press send, and I'll collect these towards the end for a Q&A. Before we jump into the questions, I'd like to invite Steve to introduce Forest Carbon.
Thanks, Ollie. It's great to be with everybody today. Forest Carbon was founded in 2006. Since that time, and working with our forestry and corporate partners, we've gone on to create over 70 new public access woodlands in the UK, comprising 7,000 plus acres and 4 million trees. These new woodlands will capture over 900,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide. They include 4,000 acres of UK Biodiversity Action Plan priority habitat type, and they are protecting over 100 miles of riverbanks from erosion, pollution and flooding. Forest Carbon achieved the first ever project certification under the UK Woodland Carbon Code back in September 2011, and the first ever delivery of UK woodland creation credits to corporate partners via the market registry in July 2013. At the end of June this year, our projects account for 75% of all Woodland Carbon Code certifications in the UK, and we're also leading the way in group certification. This is something that will be critical in delivering cost-effective long-term monitoring in the future. In addition to developing Woodland Carbon Code projects, we also provide advice through our membership of the Woodland Carbon Code Advisory Board and through consultancy work, most recently, for example, for DEFRA and the Scottish Government on the development of ecosystem services markets in the UK.
Steve, thanks for the introduction. James, before we explore the motivations for individual corporates, I'd like to start with the economy-wide view. How would you summarise the value of forestry to UK PLC?
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Forests are of enormous value to the UK in many ways. The all-embracing term is ecosystem services, and this covers four broad subject areas. First, supporting services, i.e. the things that woodlands do that underpin the survival of other ecosystems. Pollinating insects are a good example. Next, provisioning services. These are the products obtained from a forest, i.e. timber, wood fuel and wild foods. Third would be regulating services such as carbon sequestration, water flow, buffering and water purity. And finally, cultural services, the benefits, enjoyment and inspiration we get from being in and around woodlands. Let me explain some of these. We all saw the terrible consequence of flooding experienced by parts of the country earlier this year. And the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment suggests that without intervention, floods will cost the UK some £20 billion per annum by 2080. Forests can significantly mitigate flooding by reducing peak flow. They do this through transpiration from the canopy, retaining water in soils, slowing surface runoff, and reducing bank erosion and silting in rivers. Forest Carbon has been involved in several projects where flood mitigation has been one of the core objectives. In terms of the social benefits of forests, we think that employment is paramount. Around 4,000 in the UK are currently forest related, and we estimate there is the potential to create a further 10,000 jobs through voluntary carbon market-driven woodland creation and management, timber harvesting and processing. public access for recreation and education is also highly valued. Consider construction, a vitally important sector. Globally, around 45% of CO2 emissions come from the construction and use of buildings that utilize carbon-intensive methods and materials, for example, bricks, mortar, steel, and concrete. Using sustainable materials, such as wood, in the built environment turns construction from a carbon source to a carbon sink. But we must grow the trees. It may surprise people to learn that the UK is the world's third largest timber importer, and that imports account for 70% of our timber use. This is set to rise. Sustainable homegrown timber can make a positive contribution of £1 billion per annum to the nation's balance of trade through import substitution. One of the best ways of protecting old-growth forests around the world is by ensuring there is enough sustainably grown timber reaching the market. Unfortunately, this is not the case at present, as it accounts for only a third of global consumption. So, one more benefit of UK productive woodlands is that they contribute to the protection of other forests around the world. Carbon sequestration is obviously the benefit that brought our business and CarbonNeutral Company into being. And the 2009 government report on UK forestry and climate change suggested that forests could mitigate 10% the UK's national carbon footprint by 2050 if we can achieve an ambitious, but not impossible, increase in forest cover. Finally, green spaces. We know intuitively that they are good for us, and this is supported both empirically in the UK National Ecosystem Assessment and anecdotally by the overwhelmingly negative response to the government's plans to sell off public forests 4 years ago.
Actually, that's an impressive range of benefits that go much deeper than carbon. Now that we understand these benefits, could you provide a view on the potential for forest creation in the UK and how that compares to other European countries?
Yes, it's a great match. Not only will more forests be good for us, but also all of the necessary components are in place for it to be possible. The UK is one of the world's, or Europe's at least, least forested countries, and we have plenty of suitable land. The government recognises the importance of forest expansion, and several significant reports over the last few years have suggested targets. The 2009 Reid report I mentioned a moment ago, perhaps the most comprehensive, proposed an annual planting target of 23,000 hectares, as against current rate of around 10,000 hectares per annum. The aspiration is backed by a framework for excellence and permanence in UK forestry. The government's UK Forest Standard applies to all new woodlands in the UK, and the 1969 Forestry Act includes a presumption of permanent land use change where woodland is planted. In addition to this forest regulatory framework, we now have a strong carbon market infrastructure that will enable corporates to invest with confidence in forest creation as part of their CSR and carbon strategies.
Thank you. Steve, James touched on the framework here, and I understand the Woodland Carbon Code is an important part of that government framework, and it's a carbon standard our clients are increasingly interested in. Can you provide some context to the development of the Woodland Carbon Code and the role of forest carbon?
The Woodland Carbon Code is a significant breakthrough in terms of developing a credible carbon market in the UK, and it's perhaps worth spending a few moments summing up the history of its development. Back in 2007, about a year into the life of our new business, the government published its Quality Assurance Scheme for carbon offsetting. This scheme approved only compliance market credits for use in the UK voluntary market, and as such credits cannot be generated from projects in the UK, then our woodland creation activities were excluded. By the time the draft scheme was published, we'd already completed 7 new woodlands for corporate partners and were convinced more than ever that carbon-funded forest creation had a real part to play in the UK's fight against climate change and its consequences. We did lobby against the scheme's narrow definitions at the time, but were unsuccessful. In 2008, we continued to talk to various parties about the issue, and the response we ultimately received from DEFRA was that it was the absence of an independent local forest carbon standard that was the main obstacle. We turned our attention to pushing the Forestry Commission and the forestry sector to get such a code developed, and offered to support them with our own experiences in the market and from developing the in-house forest carbon standard that we had used to get our business started. In 2009, the Forestry Commission commenced work on developing what was to become the Woodland Carbon Code, and Forest Carbon was asked to join its Technical Development Advisory Group. After 2 years' work, which included a trial phase where some of our existing projects were successfully audited, the code was launched in 2011. The code encompasses all of the key principles that any credible carbon standard should include. First off being additionality, the need to demonstrate that carbon or CSR investment was key to the woodland proceeding. Quality assurance, which means in our case that the right trees have been planted in the right place and that the woodlands are managed to a high standard. Conservatism, that the carbon capture estimates are project-specific, scientifically sound and risk-adjusted. Permanence, that the trees are protected in the long term and that individual projects are protected by a pooled insurance scheme. And finally, that there is a long-term monitoring program in place. Interestingly, by the time the code was launched, we had completed 41 new woodland projects for corporate partners who had been able to see their importance even in the absence of an independent code of practice. We have since completed the certification of the bulk of these projects to demonstrate that their early faith in us and in the concept was well-founded. There have been 2 further breakthrough events in 2013, both important in completing the process of the acceptance of UK forest carbon projects by the market and by the government. The first of these was the admission of the Woodland Carbon Code to the Market Environmental Registry. This was a big vote of confidence in the code. The Market Registry is home to the world's leading carbon and environmental standards. One thing that is particularly important here is that the registry offers transparency around credit ownership and project certification status. The second major event of 2013 was the inclusion of Woodland Carbon Code credits as an acceptable mitigation measure in the government's corporate environmental reporting guidelines. This guidance is what has ultimately replaced the original 2007 Quality Assurance Scheme, and it represents both best practice for all businesses and guidance for FTSE main list companies covered by the mandatory carbon reporting regime. Moving forward to this year, we have seen so far the incorporation of Woodland Carbon Code credits in the new iteration of the British Standards Institute Guidance on Achieving Carbon Neutrality. That's the PAS 2060 standard. Looking into the future, there are a couple of things underway which could be summarised under the heading of helping the government to join up some of its carbon policies. A good example of this would be the lobbying for the inclusion of Woodland Carbon Code credits as an allowable reduction solution under the Zero Carbon Homes regulations. There is no news on this yet, but we'll be keeping people updated as things develop.
Steve, thanks for setting out that timeline. In 2013, you mentioned the reporting benefit of the Woodland Carbon Code, and I think this is an interesting dimension for corporates. Can you cover off the details of how this plays out within a corporate's carbon accounts?
We just touched on the DEFRA reporting guidance, and I'll expand on that a little here. The full reporting cycle is covered under the guidance from measurement of impact through to mitigation, and environmental impacts beyond greenhouse gas emissions are also included. With respect to greenhouse gas emissions, though, a gross net approach is taken, and UK woodland creation can be used in reducing a business's net footprint. The table below shows how this works. In order to use woodland creation in the UK as part of this process, it must be Woodland Carbon Code certified, and the carbon must have actually been delivered. What this last point means is that the trees need to have grown sufficiently to have sequestered the amount of carbon claimed, and that this must have been checked under the Woodland Carbon Code audit system. Using woodland creation as a voluntary corporate mitigation action makes a contribution to the UK meeting its national and international emissions reductions obligations. And this is an idea that many of our partners also find appealing.
Steve, thanks for clarifying the reporting benefits there. If we look beyond reporting, what do you see as the key benefits driving corporates to invest to create woodlands in the UK?
I'll go through a few of the reasons businesses have worked with us. Product differentiation is a good place to start. This has usually been the inclusion of carbon capture or tree planting with a particular product or service. Sometimes this is included in the price, and sometimes customers have the option to add on. What makes it such a strong offer is that the project is in the UK and that the benefits are tangible for customers. We've also worked with partners on employee engagement. Most often this has taken the form of staff visits to new woodlands. This is usually a day out that everybody enjoys, and in fact we have been reminded on occasions that not everyone gets the opportunity to get out into the countryside that much, and that when they do they seem to get quite a lot from it. We've also been involved in some customer engagement activities, and a great example of this was a corporate partner running a competition for its customers to celebrate the planting of its millionth tree. They had a really high level of entries demonstrating good customer engagement with the program, and the winner received a long weekend away in the Highlands and a visit to a nearby woodland to plant a ceremonial millionth tree. We touched on ecosystem services earlier, and we do have partners that have been inspired by this concept and have chosen to invest in projects that have particular benefits such as flood mitigation or priority habitat expansion. On the community side, partners have been involved in a number of new woodlands in and around communities, and for example one of our projects was the winner of Scotland's Finest Woods Awards prize for the best new community woodland in 2012. I've left carbon until last, but of course this is usually the primary reason people get in touch with us in the first place. We normally talk to businesses about the double dividend that can arise from investment in woodland creation in the UK. The first benefit is in the form of CSR and stakeholder engagement, and this can start right away. The second benefit is in the longer term. Projects are generating an asset for the business in the form of maturing carbon credits, and this could be drawn down in the future for formal reporting.
Thanks, Steve. It's really useful to be able to understand this broad range of value drivers. James, I'm wondering if you could bring some of these to life with case studies that showcase the woodlands and the particular focus of some corporate programs.
Yes, of course. We've chosen 3 projects to illustrate the principles. The first was our partnership with a major financial services business, initially planting 1 tree for every employee, but I think currently reviewing whether to develop planting for specific products. It's located at Hyde Farm in Dorset, and it's all native broadleaf species, but grown for timber. They're principally oak, and the wood will be managed on a continuous cover system, which means that the forest is never clear felled. Individual trees are selectively thinned to allow others to reach optimum size and form, while new trees grow in the spaces created. This wood links, as you can see, existing ancient semi-natural woodlands, providing vital wildlife corridors. The second example we've chosen was for an SME retail business compensating for emissions from their showrooms and logistics. And this is at Mohawk Farm in the Cheviot Hills on the Scottish border. This is headwater river bank planting designed to reduce flooding downstream, preventing diffuse pollution from livestock and generally improving the well-being of the river ecosystem. A lot of benefits to all the wildlife and aquatic life by shading and regulating the water flow and indeed cleaning up the water. The third example is for a business-to-business distributor which takes care of its own operational and logistics emissions and incorporates some of the emissions that arise from its customers' use of its products. It's at Yoxall in Staffordshire in the heart of the National Forest, probably well known to some listeners. Customers of our partner here are also offered the chance to top up of their own volition, and a couple of firms have already done so. This was a staff visit to the site 2 weeks ago. Steve took the picture.
Thanks, James. They're great case studies. You described some interesting engagement opportunities throughout those case studies. Could we go into a little more detail on what these are? And what options are available for corporates choosing to invest in UK forestry?
There are various ways we support our partners in engaging and communicating their work with us. First, an obvious place to start is signage. We place signs at the projects with names, messages, logos, and so on. People can also be involved in what we call creating, which could be in the first instance planting trees, or for example, as a follow-up activity, adding biodiversity value through wildflower planting. We also have areas where partners can get involved in managing, and this could be in years 1 or 2, replacing failed trees, and in later years removing some managed removals take place to give other trees more room to grow. There are opportunities for involvement in these areas. Some sites are also intended as classrooms or training areas, and they give individuals the opportunity to get directly involved in community activities. Events can be hosted at sites, and we can film things there. Photos and other supporting materials can be provided, and updates and so on. We can mark people's sites on our online maps so that staff and public can locate them. And finally, we support with explaining the value of investing in UK forest creation through marketing materials, including perhaps websites or PR. We're also happy to contribute to internal or external events, blogs or webinars to help people engage with their staff and stakeholders. I thought we'd just finish off by showing up some examples of the sorts of engagement activities I've just referred to there. The first photograph here is the center is the competition winner going out to plant the millionth tree. The next photo we have is on the same day, some Boy Scouts were involved in some planting activity there. The next photo on a different day and a different project, the Princess Royal came to plant a tree at one of our projects. This will be happening again this autumn at another project where we don't yet have a corporate partner, just in case anybody is interested in a nice photo op for their chief exec. The next picture shows landowners, forest manager and forest carbon winning a prize at last year's Scotland's Finest Woods Awards. The award was for an outstanding example of a new multi-purpose woodland incorporating productive timber, carbon capture and native woodland expansion. Our next picture is a community tree planting day at West Calder in the Central Scotland Forest Belt, in the Central Scotland Belt. And finally we have some school children learning about flood mitigation benefits of riparian woodland planting in the Tweed Valley.
Steve, James, thanks for sharing those insights. That was a great overview. I'd like to open it up now to questions from the attendees. And one of the questions that we have has come through appears to be around availability. So the question is really, are you able to create forests that meet a company's requirements in terms of size and location?
The general answer is yes, we can. It may take some time on occasion. We normally have a pipeline of projects at various stages in development, and it's possible that some of those may already match a partner's needs. But otherwise, we can set out to identify specific sizes of project or specific locations around the country. This can take some time on occasion because it is quite a long and complicated planning and approvals process to get permission to go ahead and plant a forest in the UK.
Thanks. The second question here relates to the trees, and they're simply asking what species of trees are planted and who decides.
Yes, well, the decider is always the landowner or farmer or his land manager, forestry professional, whoever. They make that decision. We do track the species mix as it develops, and currently in third position is oak, and in second position Scots pine, which has very recently been voted Scotland's national tree, and in first place is birch.
Thank you very much. And then a related question here. Someone's asking what a productive woodland is.
Productive woodland is one which is designed to either in whole or in part to produce timber or wood fuel, as opposed to an unproductive wood, which we generally describe as a native woodland, which is one which is just designed to enhance biodiversity, opportunities for wildlife, landscape, etc. Key thing about productive is it is designed to produce timber, whether on a clear fell basis or by continuous cover, as I described earlier.
I think something to add on that note as well is that there are very few projects now which are purely productive. They all have a mixed element, so even a woodland that has a significant proportion of, say, productive coniferous species will still have a large proportion made of native broadleaf non-productive elements.
Thank you. Fourth question here. Someone's asking, would a company be able to interact with the wildlife, such as bird watching or habitat creation within the woodland areas?
Yes, it's a good question, and one we've been giving quite a bit of thought to just recently. We would welcome that, and I think some sites will lend themselves very readily to that. Steve mentioned opportunities to plant wildflowers, perhaps additional brand and flora species to enhance the overall wildlife benefit, particularly insect life. Bird boxes, for example, nesting boxes, or even maybe on some sites bird watching hides. Those spring readily to mind, but there may be others, and we'd be delighted to hear from people who'd like to suggest them.
Thanks, James. And there's a kind of related question there around biodiversity. Someone's asking, are there any kind of specific links to organizations like the RSPB, for example?
We have worked with various environmental NGOs on specific projects. So, for example, we've worked with the Borders Forest Trust, Central Scotland Forest Trust, Tweed Forum, National Trust. So, on a project-by-project basis, these things are definitely possible and do happen.
Thank you. And then we have a technical question. Someone's asking around additionality and how that's addressed within the standard.
Yes. Now, Steve referred to that in his talk. And just to recap, that in essence, additionality means that this project could not have happened without the carbon funding. To clarify that briefly, because it's a complicated matter, there are 4 tests which we apply under the terms of the Woodland Carbon Code. The first is a legal test about land ownership and whether there are any obligations on the owner to plant or not. A financial test, which is around cash flow. An investment test, which is about the return on the investment. And then there's also a barrier test, which can be applied whether there are other extraneous circumstances that would prevent the wood going ahead.
Thank you very much. And then I think we've probably got time for one final question, which I can see relates to the reporting benefit. And the question is that there's a company interested in using woodland creation towards their carbon neutrality targets. How much are they allowed to net off against their footprint?
100% of it, as far as I'm aware. But obviously they need to understand that the carbon is not going to be reportable until sometime in the future as the woodlands grow.
Fantastic. And over what kind of time period do these reductions take place?
Typically it would be up to about 65 years would be the normal time to take to reach the complete capture that's available at a particular site. There will be a peak in that, sort of an S-shaped growth curve, so there will be a peak in the middle years as trees grow at a faster rate.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for because we're up on time. So I'd just like to thank you all for attending and for your questions, and to thank Steve and James for their insights. A recording of this webinar will be available on our website next week. We'd very much welcome your feedback, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have or to hear from you if you'd like further information about our services. My contact details are up on the screen, but it's time to close the webinar, so thanks again for attending.